Okay, well, let's start with an introduction and we'll go from there. So thank you very much for joining me today for this webinar, a deep dive into Splunk Observability. It's going to take the form of a kind of extended demo. There's actually a lot to cover. Hopefully you've had a chance to attend one of my previous webinars. Last time out, we had a session going on, talking about how to achieve a high level of observability. And that talked about the different tools that form the observability suite and how they can be used to create that high visibility, high observability setup. So today we're going to look at the site itself, the product itself, and the components that make it up. As I say, there's a lot to cover. And what I'm going to start with, if you'll indulge me, is a little bit of shopping. So I'll come to that in a second, but firstly, an introduction to our kind of home screen. We've got the core tools here: APM, RUM infrastructure, and Log Observer. And there are also a couple of other tools that aren't immediately part of this, but do form part of the observability suite. We've got synthetics, synthetic monitoring, and web optimization, and also the Splunk on-call tool, which coordinates your alerting and strategy. So I'm going to cover all of that in the next half an hour to 45 minutes. But like I say, before that, I need to do a little shopping. So what we have here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by demonstrating a kind of an e-commerce site. Here we have a lovely online boutique selling all your hipster, fulfilling all your hipster needs, as it were. I'm going to purchase a couple of things. I've got some birthdays coming up. I need to sort out some presents, and we might just hit a problem. So let's see what we can do. So I'm a big fan of vinyl. That is a very reasonably priced record player, so I have one of those. And you can see I've also put some camping mugs in my cart. So let's say that will do for today, and we'll place an order. Okay. So first issue, nothing's happening. Okay. Well, as with all demonstrations, one should have a backup in place. So here's one I prepared earlier. So these are two sites that we've got set up, just to explain the kind of arrangement. We have one that's set up, configured for RUM monitoring, real user monitoring, and one that is just set up to do APM, application performance monitoring. The APM-based one is working. There we go. We have a complete order, confirmation ID, etc., etc. But if I go back to here, we're still running into problems. So what's going on? Well, I'm going to start with the front end. Okay, so real user monitoring allows you to see individual sessions as they pass through your setup, your environment. So let's start with RUM. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to whiz through this fairly quickly to show the type of kind of root cause analysis you might do with this information. And then we're going to go through each of the tools individually to go into that sort of deep dive. But I want to show how it all comes together first. So here we are looking at our RUM dashboard. And like I said, I'm going to come back to this in more detail. Just going to show you the activity this morning. So I put in some activity earlier, which we'll take a closer look at. But the first thing we're going to do, well, actually, let me go back. On this first screen, we can see errors. Okay, now we can immediately see that something's not quite right. We've got a big spike in errors from the activity that I was pushing through earlier. And this little spike here is what I just did on screen that didn't work. And you can see immediately some errors that clearly need attention. Okay, load failed, can't read properties. Oh, look, we've got a typo here on the word price. All of these things clearly showing problems. So let's go in and have a look. Like I said, I'm going to come back and explain the screen in a bit more detail. But what I want to show is once you've identified a problem, okay, so we're going to drill down to this very first one that we can see, okay. We can see all these spikes showing errors, and I want to get an example session to show an example of what's going on. So let's just pick the first one. Fingers crossed this one is going to be a good example. And as we go through the span, what I want you to notice here is these links to APM. Okay, this is jumping. So we're looking at real user monitoring data that's been collected from the browser, showing the session data that user is generating from their browser. But we're now linking to the backend traces that are being generated within the application itself. So if I scroll down a bit further, I think this is a good one here, down to the cart. So if I click on Trace ID, we've now gone, as you can see up here, into the APM tool. We're now looking at the full trace with all the spans in a waterfall structure. Again, we will come back and look at this in more detail. But the next thing I want to show you is down here, we've got a link to the log. So we can now drill down from the real user monitoring, from the user generated data from the browser. We've connected to the APM, which is collecting data from the application stack itself. And now we're drilling down to the logs that are being generated by, again, that application platform to show the sorts of errors, the actual detail of those errors, excuse me, that are potentially affecting your site. Grab some water there while waiting for that to load. Of course, it's now going to take its time. Anyway, that's fine. I just wanted to show you the basic principle of going from that front end through into the application space and then down further in to the logs. So let's go back to our home page and start that process again, but this time taking our time and looking much more closely at each of the components. So as I say, we've got the kind of 4 core elements here: the application performance monitoring, real user monitoring, infrastructure, and the log observer we just saw there. So let's build this up then from the back end forward this time. Let's start with the infrastructure. Okay, so this isn't a particularly huge environment. We've just got those 2 servers I was talking about, where we have one, excuse me, running the RUM front end, and the other one with the APM components running. We are running these in clusters. So if I click on Kubernetes, you can see these are the 2 clusters that make up that environment. This, I believe, is the APM based one. So let's drill into that. So now we can see all the pods, what's going on within them. Okay, we can select any particular one. We've got some which are highlighted red. Something's going on there, perhaps. And across the top here, various tabs to allow us to drill down to different bits of information. We've got a breakdown of each container and how it's behaving, the details of each pod, what's running, what containers are running within each of the pod. We've got some fluentd running in here. What else we've got? Nginx. There's the OpenTelemetry collector. This is the actual method that we collect the data with. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about that today. For those familiar with Splunk, the OpenTelemetry collector is similar to Universal Forwarder. They are currently separate products. I believe at some point in the future they may well converge into a single one. But it is essentially the agent that you install on the endpoint to collect the data and send it to the observability platform. Okay, we can see details of the specific workloads in here as well. And all of these are out-of-the-box dashboards that are being used for looking at this. And we can expand on those, as I'll come to later. So this is showing, for example, here we've got the cart service, and we can drill down and look at that in more detail as well. So I think it's fair to say largely what you'd expect from an infrastructure monitoring tool, but it really is detailed and comprehensive as you could want it to be, really, and the ability to look at the clusters, the Kubernetes clusters and the pods within them, and then tie that into the activities in other aspects of the site, the APM, and as you can see down here again, the log observer, to look at the logs being generated by that as well. So there are other dashboards as well. So down the side here, we have the different tools that you can link to, say the primary tools, and then the things that you can do with them. So if we drill down to dashboards, I'm just going to highlight a couple here. Again, these have all come out of the box. I haven't had to create any of these because we've installed things like AWS. The AWS dashboards are available. We've installed an OpenTelemetry collector, so we've got an OpenTelemetry one there. Nginx was one of the processes running on the in the clusters, and Kubernetes as well. So let's have a look at the overview here. So same sort of principle, you've got tabs across the top here, allowing you to drill into this information in lots of different ways. Heat maps, the range of visualizations is pretty comprehensive as well. And obviously where you've got different teams using different parts of the different parts of your infrastructure, the dashboards can be tuned and filtered so that you're only seeing those that are relevant to that team. So we can filter up here and say, right, we're only wanting to see what comes from that particular cluster, and then that will update. And lots of options across the top here to tune that. We've also got a time window that can be set and adjusted as needed. Usually with infrastructure monitoring, you're looking at a fairly immediate time zone, but time period, but you may want to do some longer term analytics as well. So that's a very brief look at the dashboarding side of things. This is all configurable and editable. We've got different ways of making changes to this. Each of these has its own option. You can drill into one particular panel and see how it's been configured. As you can see, there's a lot going on here. We've got various mathematical functions being applied here in order to produce this particular output. You can see the different visualization options across the top here as well. And this is a kind of simplified interface for setting up these the particular elements you're seeing up here. You can see on the right here, we've got an option to view signal flow. That allows you to see the actual language that's underneath this. Again, if you're familiar with Splunk, it's not really like SPL. It's a more structured language than that. But yeah, you've got the possibility then of doing something similar to what you'd do with the Splunk programming language to create whatever searches and outputs you need. Okay, so although this is a deep dive, it's got to be a fairly quick deep dive, so I'm going to move on. So the other key element to this, and it applies, I should say, the dashboards apply to all the data that's available in observability, not just infrastructure data, but the APM data, the RUM data. Likewise with alerts. So for alerting, we create what are called detectors to detect a particular change that's of interest, and then set up what the appropriate action is going to be driven off the back of that. And you can see we've got some detectors here that have triggered alerts. The environment that we're running is quite heavy, so we do get a few issues like this, particularly at startup. You can see I started this about an hour ago, and we had a few things pop up at that point. And if we have a look at the detectors themselves, let's see, we can drill into one and have a look. Now, that's not a good example because it doesn't have any data in it. Let's pick one that does have some data in it. Okay, so you can see here, I really like this screen. This is something that I haven't seen in other products, but it's showing you when in a timeline the alert will be triggered. And when you're setting up an alert, and I'm not going to do that today, but when you're setting up an alert, one of the things it'll also give you is a preview screen that looks a bit like this, and will show you when an alert would have triggered historically in the last, say, hour or 24 hours or whatever time period you're looking at, when those alerts would have triggered, so you can see how busy, how noisy this alert is likely to be, and then perhaps tune your thresholds accordingly. So really nice setup. And if we go back to the dashboards and pick another example, Let's have a look at the Nginx ones this time. On any of these charts, any of these panels, you can see this little bell symbol, and that allows you to create a new detector from this specific chart. So you can start creating those alerts from anywhere in the system. So you're getting a kind of singular alerting strategy built around this environment. So we've had a brief look at dashboards. We've had a look at the Kubernetes tools supplied out of the box, particularly useful for teams using Kubernetes, and the alerting that goes across the tooling. So that's a quick look at infrastructure monitoring. Let's have a closer look now at the APM part of the tooling. So application performance monitoring, essentially using spans and building those up to form traces of activity sessions passing through a series of services, whether that's a microservice architecture or a more traditional monolithic tool. Essentially, the instrumentation that is generated or used rather with the OpenTelemetry collector will be able to do a certain amount of automatic instrumentation, and then you can do custom instrumentation beyond that to pick out further details that are relevant to the business. So if we pick our environment, I think this is the correct one if I remember rightly. That's looking encouraging. So here's our overview of the activity of our application. This is the backend system that supports that online boutique we were playing around with earlier. And this has also got some data being automatically generated in it to make sure that there's some activity. So let's have an overview look at this. Right, so this is one of my favorite screens. This is our service diagram. Really, this is showing how the different services within your environment are interacting with each other. And the key thing is, this is built from the data. So this is how it's actually interacting, perhaps not necessarily how it was designed to, but this is what's actually happening. So this is how these different services are connected. This is showing the amount of data flowing between them, the size of the lines indicating how much activity there is between those two nodes, and the size of the node itself showing the degree of activity within it. And hopefully it's clear that we have an issue here. So this red highlighted number is the time, the average time that it's taking, 8.9 seconds. That is extremely slow. This is also slow, but it's also highlighted in red. And if I pop this legend up just to explain, so as I mentioned, the size of the nodes indicates the number of requests, but also this red indicates that there is a potential root cause error here at this point. So this is using some machine learning tools to identify likely root cause. Obviously, we'd have to analyze that to see if that is the case. But based on the fact that this is at the end of this particular chain and the activity that's causing the problem seems to be largely in this particular point of the system, then that has been determined to be a likely root cause. So let's do a bit of an investigation here then. So we think this may be an issue. So let's click on this payment service. And what we can do from here is we can look at a tag spotlight for this. So if I click on this, you'll see that we've got the service, payment service, pre-selected up here. And this is showing the activity for the last 15 minutes for this particular service. So we've now got to look for sort of clues as to what may be causing the problem. And for example, we've got the tenant level here, so gold, silver, and bronze all seem to be more or less equally affected. We certainly have more errors in this payment service link here. Okay, and what else we got? Okay, down at the bottom here we've got the version. So the story here is that there's been a canary push of this new version, 350.10, and we can see that all the errors are restricted to 350.10 version, and the ones that are behaving themselves are all in the previous 350.9 version. So we've got a pretty clear indication there that our issue is with this particular version. Now, a nice simple example, obviously it could well be much more complex than that, but quite a nice way of looking at it. Another thing we can do here, I'll just quickly show, is if we've identified we think version might be the issue, we can say, right, let's open this up and show it by version, and now visually you can very clearly see that the 0.10 version is where all of the errors are, and the 0.9 version has no errors at all. So really useful visual way of drilling into your service tree. And down here we can also see those links that we saw previously, one going to the logs and now going back to the infrastructure. So if I open that in a new tab, just have a quick look, because it's going to take us to the specific cluster that is running this, and highlight the particular pod that is running the payment service. Now, it isn't the infrastructure that's the issue here, so that's fine, but it's good to know that we can drill into that in case it was. And likewise, if we open the logs in another tab, maybe we can get a bit more information about what's going on. So perhaps something in the logs that is happening around this particular time will give us some clues as to what's going on. So you can see here, at the moment, we've got this set to everything. When we look at a particular trace, we'll drill into that a bit more closely. But we can see some errors here. Okay, so let's filter that by, I'll come back to that. So yeah, let's see, what does this say? Drill into that. Failed payment processing through buttercup payments, invalid API token, and there we've got the word test at the start of the API token. So again, that seems likely to be the root cause. We've got the version 350.10, so maybe that's what's causing our issues. So yeah, good to get that log information complementing what we can see in here. And if we wanted to look more closely at what's happening in here, we can pick a point on the graph and get an example trace. Now, I've got to be very careful to explain here. This is an example trace. It is not, this tracing is not sampled. In other words, all traces, all spans that make up the what are generated by your application layer will be collected and stored and available for analysis. That's really key if you're going to be tying together the same thing from your front end, from your real user monitoring, to what's going on in your backend. If there's sampling, you may find that the key traces that you're after haven't been retained. Okay, Splunk Observability retains all metrics, all logs, all traces, so that you've got full visibility. So let's drill into, let's have a look at this one. So we saw this earlier when we were drilling in from real user monitoring, and you can see again we've got our link to the log. I'm going to use that link in a second, because this log is going to be specifically for this trace. So you can see the trace ID up here in the top right, and this full waterfall picture of every span, how it's performing, how long it's taking, and here we've got a couple of errors. It's an unknown error. Okay, something's going on here, we're not sure what it is. So you can immediately see highlighted where the problem might be. If we drill into this further, we can look at the particular message, invalid request. Okay, I've got the version number again. All right, is there anything else in here? And this is where you say, okay, I'm not seeing what I need from here. I'm not getting a specific error message. Now we'll drill into the log. And this time the logs will be restricted to this particular trace. So previously we saw all of them for the payment service. Now you can see at the top here, we've got the trace ID as a filter. And the error message that we identified earlier, here it is again, invalid API token. So for that kind of root cause analysis, all the information you need is there. And you can really, we're talking about this session about deep diving, you can deep dive into your data as well. So yeah, Anything else from APM? Just check my notes. No, we've had a look at all of that. We've had a look at the log observer. Let's just go into that directly. So the log observer, again, for those familiar with Splunk, this is a little bit like Splunk Cloud. I believe there is a bit of Splunk Cloud running in the background, but as you can see from the front end, it's very different. We don't have a search bar asking you to come up with some wonderful bit of SPL in order to show everything that you need to see. This is much more of a kind of point and click type user interface. You can see the fields that you might be interested in. And so if we wanted to add a filter, let's say we were only interested in things that were severity, so severity, and we're only interested in errors. Okay, so there are 140 errors, let's say, equal to that. Okay, and then we can just do, we can just look at that. So here we go, all the errors, and we can see what time they were, what time period they were active over. And you can see the screen update there. This is updating in close to real time. We're only looking at the last 15 minutes, and this will update, yeah, say it's nearly real time, so essentially as quickly as it can. And then each of these events can be drilled into, and it's worth noting here that the connection between the different tools, infrastructure monitoring, APM, RUM, it goes both ways. Here we can drill into APM from the log observer to look at the payment service map. That's where we were just now looking at this error. We can also drill down to the containers that are running this. So this interconnectivity is really a key part of what makes the observability suite such an effective tool in this space. Okay, so yeah, not a lot more to say about Log Observer itself, but it's there underpinning all of these different tools. Okay, so back to real user monitoring. So we've had a look at the back end, we've looked at the application layer. So what's actually happening for the users themselves? Okay, so let's first make sure we're selecting our RUM environment. Okay, and we need a suitable time period that is actually going to show us something. Go. And let's drill now into the sort of the full screen. So previously we just had a kind of overview to give you some overall insights, and you can see those errors. Now we're really getting into the meat of it with all of the information presented all together. So some key metrics here. We've got the JavaScript errors, network errors, and the kind of latency, the resource, the duration of activity. Web vitals. These are, I think, the Google standard web analytic web vital tools. Largest content for LCP, and all these acronyms all mean something to people familiar with analyzing real user monitoring. There are some other key metrics here, and at the bottom we've got custom events. Now for this demonstration we don't have custom events set up, but this is where, if in the real user monitoring part of the tooling, if you were needing custom events or custom data being collected, that's how you put it in. And I would just mention that in our so we're still waiting to check out. If I go back to the home page here and we have a look at the source, I'll just highlight where this sits. So you can see these two lines in the header are one is showing the JavaScript that's being added here, and the second one here then is the target ingest. So you've got RUM ingest, EU SignalFX, RUM, and then this is the key that's used for authenticating, essentially, and managing the amount of data being sent into observability. So yeah, those lines get added. Beyond that, you can add some further elements here, which is how you would set up custom events as well, adding to this. Okay, so we saw in my kind of demonstration at the start how you can drill into these and see and then drill down into APM and on then to the infrastructure and to the log observer. So if you saw something here that you wanted to investigate, click on it and it brings up the information on the right here. And then if we want to go down a bit deeper, so let's have a look at the cart here, something's going on here. We get to the same sort of tag spotlight that we saw previously with the APM tool. And if I just push this a little bit further, make sure I capture everything I was doing earlier. So I want to show you this. So one of the things we can do is select an area and then zoom in on it just to highlight a particular area of interest. And we can do that again. So, okay, let's have a look at this. Okay. And then you can see the types of information here. We've got operating system, Mac OS and Android. So I was using my phone and my computer here, my MacBook. We've got Chrome. I did do some on Safari as well, but I think that must have been a different time. And you can see the browser version, important if you maybe have variations, if you're seeing errors in one particular browser version or one particular browser, really useful to be able to identify that. And location as well. I'm not quite sure why. I'm in both London and Letchworth Garden City, but Letchworth is pretty close to London. And it may be that a particular geographical location is causing problems. And yeah, that's all information in there. So otherwise, the principles are very similar to APM that we were looking at before. We have a series of filters at the top here and the ability to drill down on this. You can select, let's say you wanted to see Mac OS. Okay, if we click on that, it gets added to the filters at the top here. So, real user monitoring, yeah, really useful to pull together the whole story for end-to-end usage. And that leaves us with a couple of components. Whilst I'm still in here, though, we will just quickly recap on these elements. So we had a look at the alerting. Should have actually shown that you can do that from here as well. So from these bars up here, we can create a detector. So you can use the data that's being generated by these particular panels to drive any alerting. So alerting really can be created from anywhere, and you can just create a detector from scratch. You can just start and write your own script, your own selection to generate a detector and then determine the alerting strategy from that. Dashboards, again, you can just create your own. We've got team-specific dashboards as well. We've not got that set up at the moment because we're just using this as a demo environment. But you can have clusters of dashboards that are specific to teams, so that your ops team can see things differently to your your support team or whatever. So yeah, lots of flexibility with dashboarding and lots of content out of the box. And really, the other thing I want to emphasize here, metric finders allows you to find metrics within your system, very useful for when you're creating those dashboards. But the other thing I want to emphasize here is the data setup. So the data setup is a series of helpful instructions, whether that's in some cases scripts that you can run in order to install perhaps the OpenTelemetry collector. How do you set up your AWS to send data? How do you set up GCP? What settings do you need? All of this information about lots and lots of core tools out there. There's so much to choose from. It's a bit hard to kind of summarize it, really. There's infrastructure. This is the infrastructure monitoring section, application performance monitoring, supports at the moment all these core technologies. And this list has actually increased quite a lot since I first saw it. Jaeger's been added more recently. I think Zipkin's been added recently. Certainly Python, Java, .NET, Go, Node.js, they were all there from the start, but certainly this is being added to all the time. The log collection methods with FluentD, Logstash, AWS, and RUM, Android, general browser installation, and iOS. So yeah, there's a wealth of information here to help get things started as well. as well as the support that we can provide in getting set up. So that leaves two things to mention, and then I'll kind of round things up. Splunk on Call. It's not kind of visible here, but it is there in the background. Splunk on Call is a tool to allow teams to be alerted in a kind of controlled and manageable fashion. If you've got multiple teams that need to be alerted if there are issues that need addressing, and multiple members within those teams, people go on holiday, people are off sick, people have times when they can be contacted, times when they can't. All of that is built in, and that can then start building up an escalation process to allow you to say, right, in the first instance, send this person a text message. In the next instance, do so, but send them an email as well and copy in somebody else. Then after a certain period of time, you need to escalate it to maybe somebody else in the team, and so on and so forth. So it's a good, simple tool for just pulling all this together to provide a complete alerting strategy to go with the system that generates the alerts, right? All of those different components we've looked at. So that's log, sorry, that isn't. That is Splunk on Call. The other key element is synthetic monitoring. Synthetics covers two areas. Now, at the moment, this sits in a different interface, and the reason is that Splunk has made a lot of acquisitions over the last 4 or 5 years. The components that make up the observability suite have been really successfully merged into one, but they were based on different technologies initially. Rigor has been out in the market for a number of years and has recently been rebranded as Splunk Synthetic Monitoring. My understanding is that this will be brought into the same interface, but that is one of those future-looking statements that can't be 100% sure that's going to happen, but I suspect it will. And synthetic monitoring kind of makes up two parts. We have the synthetic part of it, where you're synthesizing user activity and using that for testing, for load balancing, for ensuring that your user journeys are effective, and when you're making changes, you can use it for testing. So in that situation, you would have scripts for stepping through a system and seeing what that activity actually looks like, how long does it take for pages to load. So a really fantastic tool. The other part of it, and I'll show that in a second, but the other part of it is web optimization. So we've got here a daily check that we do on Somerford's website, and it's giving a best practice score based on on identified best practice. A lot of that's coming from Google. If you're aware of how the Google algorithm works, one of the things it does is it promotes things that are effectively well-made. Well-made websites will be pushed up above those that it considers not to be so well-made. So this scoring is sort of based partly on that, and it will show you all sorts of information about what your website is doing. The Lighthouse performance score, not so hot today. It will also show you really useful things like third parties, what third-party activities are impacting your site. Really important for particularly e-commerce sites that, for example, use external payment services, and kind of breaks down where that best practice scoring is perhaps falling a bit short. You've also got this huge library of best practices that you can drill into and see advice on how to improve it. So really useful, and you can point this at any public website. So if you want to see how the competition is performing, you can actually analyze their sites as well. Synthetics, we haven't got anything set up in here, which is why I was kind of skimming over it, but the different types of tooling available in here are really comprehensive, and as I say, Rigor has been around for a long time. It's a well-respected tool, very mature now. So this is a very, very powerful part of what the observability suite can offer. So I think it's time for me to round things out. We're coming up to the 45-minute mark. So just to say, though this has been a deep dive, it feels to me like I've really rattled through and rushed through it a bit. We do run workshops where we do go a bit more hands-on and go really properly deep diving into this, 3 to 4 hours long, depending on the specific content we cover. So I'd certainly recommend looking out for the next one of those I'll be running if you want to see a bit more. If you're interested in trying this out, it's very straightforward to set up a trial environment. It is very easy to get data in the first instance. It can be very quick. Essentially, you follow the instructions in the data setup, and you can have data in minutes. It really can be that straightforward. Of course, as with all these things, it isn't always. But if you're interested in that, or you want to do some sort of proof of concept, yeah, please let us know. But otherwise, I think that's all from me. I'm just going to have a quick look. Are there any questions? It doesn't look like it. So if you do have any questions, or you want to go into any more detail about this, please do get in touch with us. As I say, my name is Paul Winchester. Probably should have introduced myself at the beginning of this. Part of the team here at Somerford, the delivery team, and I generally specialize in anything to do with IT ops. So observability very much a focus for me at the moment, along with things like Splunk ITSI. But like I say, thank you very much for your time this morning. I really appreciate you joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. And like I say, if you have any questions at all, please do get in touch. Thank you very much.